Welcome, everyone. My name is Daniel Chikala, and I'm the Director of Web Marketing here at Project Assistance. It's my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar, A PMO Revolution, the Managed Service Replacement for an Ineffective and Inefficient Model. Today, we are delivering this remote, as we have been for the last several webinars, due to the coronavirus outbreak. So there is a heightened risk of technical difficulties, in addition to some T-storms that might be coming through. So we have Dan Banis, our latest practice director, waiting in the wings in case our main presenter is knocked out. And he may be joining in a more conversational basis throughout as well. But I'll introduce our main presenter, Gus Chikala, who's the president and CEO here at Project Assistance. Gus founded Project Assistance in 1996 to help companies achieve better, faster, and more cost-effective project-based results. He's a recognized portfolio and project management expert who's published many popular articles and books on the subject, and is frequently asked to present and teach topics of interest in project management. Take it away, Gus.
Thanks, Dan, and thanks everybody for being here. We have the background of a pretty big thunderstorm at the moment, so sorry about the background. Hopefully we'll keep the electricity on as we get started. So today's presentation is we're talking about a PMO revolution, how a managed service replacement for an inefficient, ineffective model. So we'll get into that around these agenda topics here, right? So we'll talk about the challenges of the legacy model for PMOs. We're going to focus a lot on how you can deconstruct the roles of a project manager and redistribute some of those roles. How do you do that? How do you make it work? Okay, we'll talk about that, fitting the gears together, and some examples, and applying a managed service model that enables this premise that we're going to put forth today. So when we say with the legacy model, there is a lot of, I hear a lot of criticism about what we would call traditional project management, that the world has changed and things are accelerating, and maybe project management can't keep up with it anymore. And so we want to just, we want to talk about some of the symptoms and some of the problems we see out there, and some of those assumptions that lead to malpractice, in our opinion, right? So let's start with what we say, the bad logic that holds organizations back, right? We hear all the time, there's not enough time to follow everything in the PMBOK, and we're going to talk about this, right? There are rigorous processes in the project management of theory, and so there is an undertow that doing all these rigorous processes are just not able to be done. It's too inefficient, it's too costly, takes too much time, so we can ditch the PMBOK or most of it, right? The other one oftentimes comes from maybe stakeholders that don't know the theory of project management. Why do we need adults to do adult supervision? We have professionals, they know their job, and they should be able to work independently. So that's a built-in, like, why do we need project management? The other one is, project managers should be spread out across multiple projects, because we have these professionals, and we shouldn't have to have a full-time project manager. PM tools are too complex for the average PM, so therefore we're not going to use complex tools. There's some examples out there we're going to talk about. The ones that are the best. There are a lot of questions about organizations. Can they really reach I would say the pinnacle of the benefits of these tools? We'll talk about that a little bit. Bogging down a $150 asset down with an administrative task is a waste of resources, right? So a lot of times we see administrative tasks suffering, suboptimized, not used often enough to keep control of a project. Another one, perfectly accurate capacity versus demand is unattainable. I mean, we have worked with a lot of organizations that want to bring in, some of these high-level enterprise PPM tools such as Clarity, PlanView, Primavera, Microsoft Project Online, Project Server. It's really hard to do, and it's complicated, and it's a lot of effort. So we're just going to have to live in a world where the demand against capacity is just not going to be accurate, or we use spreadsheets and brute force to try to put something forth that really has no credibility. The master schedulers are a luxury. We'll talk about one of these roles when we talk about deconstruction of a project manager's roles. Many organizations think it's a luxury. It's hard to get the funding, so we'll address that also. So the next slide. We're going to talk about some of the details where a lot of organizations have a lot of excuses about why they can't get into the minutia of the matter of project management, right? So control is an objective measure. You're out of control if you're not tracking progress, analyzing variances to a baseline, proactively managing risk and issues, controlling scope, up and down cadence, communicate across the organization, and really have in measurement on time, budget, specification, and the realization of the benefits that really started the business case for why this project even started, right? So we want to, talk about why this is important and why it can happen. It's important, and when we see, I say the lack of the basis of control, we see a mess, right? So the question is, how can we do this efficiently and get it done right? And that's what we want to talk about today, right? The other thing is there's a lot of modern controls, trends. I mean, away from traditional control on projects, right? There's just had a really interesting conversation with a client 2 weeks ago about not using project management on an agile application. We had a very interesting conversation about the agile part of developing software can be a really great and a very effective good practice to get software right and to engineer it right and make sure that the customer gets it right with the user stories. So there's a sort of an undertow in many organizations that traditional project management is not flexible. Anybody who has been around real project management, it was meant to be flexible, right? The problem is we get into these situations where stakeholders are inflexible, and therefore project management gets stonewalled, and therefore it seems to be inflexible, right? But we think about lean manufacturing and how that works. MVP, the minimal viable product approaches. There's this idea that we're moving fast and having the luxury of what we're going to call the 6 roles of project management is just not going to work in the 2020s decade. So we want to get into that. All right. So if the PMBOK, we don't have enough time to follow everything in the PMBOK. The correct conclusion is pick the parts that are pertinent to you. Now, most people do that, right? But the correct conclusion is what's pertinent is the basis of control, and that's what we're going to talk about. Adults don't need much adult supervision. With the appropriate support, project managers can run multiple large projects and be effective, and we'll get into that. The tools are too complex. Um, our experience is that 50% of project managers will never get proficient in a complex project scheduling tool. And so that, on the surface, that is a reason to say that these tools don't work. If half of my staff can't ever get the complexity of a scheduling tool that gives me baselines, gives me a critical path, gives me variances to the baseline, gives me resource demand versus capacity, these things are complex, right? So the question is, how do you offload, train the PM? Okay, that's half. The other half, what are you going to do, right? So we're going to talk about specializing and centers of excellence to make these things work, right? The $150 asset, we're talking about, if you place a project manager from a staffing firm, or even if you have, you pay somebody, a senior project manager, $150,000, maybe more. How do we justify the administration time for that kind of a level of a project manager, right? So, offload the task, lower grade paid, lower pay grade, but also more, when we talk about center of excellence, a center of competency on some of these roles we're going to talk about. Perfectly accurate capacity versus demand, a fully adopted process with low rigor is good enough for now. So what we mean is, how do you come out of the gate, and we'll get into that, right? How do we get to a capacity and demand model that doesn't break the norms or the capabilities of the investment of project management? How can you put some time into that and have something that's meaningful, okay? So master schedules are a luxury. The ROI shows significantly when we think about, the demand versus capacity. It's the holy grail of portfolio and project management, right? You can't commit to a portfolio if you don't know your resources are going to show up, right? There's a lot of portfolios out there that make promises, and when one project slips, those resources are not released, and the next project is on hold, and that's a snowball effect, right? So there is some real ROI out there when you think about having centralized scheduling capability such that we have that data accurate, and now we can really manage a portfolio and make commitments as expected. So let's talk a little bit about this topic of deconstructing and redistributing project management roles, right? So we talk about 3 categories, 6 roles. Managing projects requires 6 roles, and we bundle these into pairs, right? Leadership and what I would say a solution specialist. We have one of our business lines is placing project managers on an hourly basis. Typically, our customer is looking for a strong project manager that has leadership capabilities, that can handle with the stakeholders, who can communicate and negotiate, and all the strong soft skills that make a great project manager. And oh, by the way, this is going to be an SAP implementation, or we're going to be doing clinical trials, and we have somebody who has to know something about how to run life sciences projects, or we need specifically a transition from on-premise data centers into the cloud, right? So typically these first 2 roles are the main focus, and I would say 80% of our requirements that we get, hey, this is the kind of project manager we need. We rarely get somebody saying, does this person have a scheduling capability around one of our complex, effective but complex scheduling tools, or how they extract data analysis to do the cadence of, are we on track? Do we have control? Okay, so those 2 go together, and then the coordination and the administration is based on scheduling, right? I mean, once we relieve a project-based organization to not have a rigorous scheduling system, application, tool, we don't have a lot of things that a schedule carries. Schedule carries responsibilities of resources. It carries deadlines. It carries an approach. You know, what is the business case? The business case is we got a problem, we got an opportunity, and we're going to put some money into this, and we're going to solve a problem. Well, we don't have a way to solve the problem unless we have a work breakdown structure. We have an approach. We have a methodology, right? So whether it's life sciences, whether it's construction, whether it's software, new product development, all these things have a methodology, and those schedules have to reflect specifically the unique solution that we're trying to solve, right? The problem we're trying to solve with the solution. The scheduling is critical to create the coordination and the administration of how we run a project. Okay, so we're going to get into that a little deeper, right? The lack of bandwidth to juggle all six, what we mean by that is, you know, we see a lot of organizations where the PMOs are not very strong. They are not unbundling these roles, taking some of the pressure off, centralizing some of the scheduling and data analysis, giving project coordinators or administration help for these leadership roles that have specialized solution capabilities. So what happens is, what we see is that there's an outcome where there's not enough bandwidth to juggle all six roles. So therefore, we don't do it. We don't do it effectively. And you know, we talked about some reasonable, I would say, excuses by why that doesn't happen, right? So how do we address that, right? So the tiers, you know, these are just some things, some terminology we're going to talk about, right? The senior project managers, the program managers have a high level of cost. The project managers, the project leaders, and then some support capabilities, the coordinators, the schedulers, the project administrators, right? So we, you know, we're going to talk about a model where we, on purpose, have these tiers, or something that looks like this, that says, well, you know, how do we redistribute these six roles such that the leadership, you know, I've seen a lot of great project management leaders that just stumble through Microsoft Project, where we're running a turnaround on a $15 million program, and there's been a little bit of an uprising that our project managers can't use Microsoft Project. Well, what are you going to do, right? So you know, we get into this, how do we unbundle it? How do we get some support in the PMO? A lot of PMOs have this idea. You know, this is not a new idea, right? What we're really talking about is, okay, it looks good on paper. How do you really implement it, right? So you know, we're talking about the project management leader. I'm not going to read these things off, right? But you'll see some things in here that a lot of project managers are good at, right? Facilitating meetings and collaboration, and you know, directing the teams, and you know, monitoring reports on progress. You know, how do you do that, right? If you have a really great, strong, expensive project leader, do you want them doing all these things? Managing the resolution, okay, but where do you get the project issue list? Where do you get the risks? You know, how do we do this on a weekly cycle, running 2 or 3 projects, and have all this information at our fingertips? Not easy at all. Okay, so that's kind of just, you know, a summary of the project manager, the leadership, and the solution specialist roles, right? The coordination, administration. We've seen more organizations do this effectively, where there are administrative support and coordinators that can, you know, scheduling meetings. You can see right here, right? Coordinating tasks, working with updating the budget, doing things like updating issue logs, risk logs, those kinds of things. Minutes are critical. I learned a long time ago that I can control a project if I own the written news of the project, right? And by putting forth the minutes, the status reports, the cadence, the agendas, all that stuff really creates control, right? And when we're not being optimized and being efficient and actually running these frequencies on a weekly basis, that can be pretty hard to do, right? Data analysis is a big deal. If you use some of the really great tools out there, pulling data together is not necessarily easy. Microsoft Project has a filtering capability. You have to know a task doesn't have a baseline unless, or how do you know if it doesn't have a baseline? You have to query the date, the baseline start and finish, and see that it says NA. Well, how many people know how to put a filter to put out there to say, show me any tasks that don't have a baseline, because we can't track them unless they have a baseline. So even just doing something simple like, give me a filter to show me we made some scope changes, we added some tasks. What are the tasks that don't have a baseline? That can be pretty tricky, right? I have seen project managers to schedule to have a lack of what the scheduling engine's even doing, right? I put a date in. I ask a project manager, why do you Excel? Why do you change your project in Excel? They say the dates change in these other tools, and I don't know what they're doing, right? So this is a real problem to get rigor at a price point and an efficiency where we can have this valuable data on a regular basis, but not burden the people that don't have the strong skills, despite the fact that they're great leaders and solution specialists. I see regularly at least 50% of a group of project managers that have great project leaders will not do this stuff well. So how do you make it work? So, we unbundle the roles. Well, that's rated. This is like the question. Can you just add resources and get the job done faster, right? We know when we start distributing tasks and breaking them down and spreading it across a lot of people, that has its own sort of sophistication and begs for optimization and harmonizing these roles. If we're going to break them out, how do they come together? How does the communication happen, right? So all of that coordination and integration and knowledge transfer, I've seen a title, Director of Continuity, right? Part of the Center of Excellence has an obligation to optimize the flow of information between separate roles, right? So that's one example. We're not saying you have to do that, right? But we've seen that. It's effective, and it creates efficiency, right? So how do you change an organization from what you're doing now to the future? You say, well, that's a great idea. We want to unbundle. We want to have Center of Excellence. We want to have a roadmap. How do we change the organization, right? So this is a methodology we use. We call it the VIA methodology, right? Have the vision, the implement, and the adoption. But the critical part of this is what we call the 4 gears, right? You see on the left side, we get a lot of calls saying, we're going to redo. We just got a call yesterday. We're going to change our methodology of how we deliver projects. In this case, it was a professional services organization. We want to change the methodology. Well, that means we have to build processes. Well, when we change the process, we have to train the people. So now we're working on skills and training. We're going to have some kind of a technology or tools that enables us to have schedules and to have variances and to have a cadence and to send the news to the customers and our stakeholders and our team members. And governance is really 2 things that jump right out of my head. One part of governance is having the oversight that the methodology is being used as prescribed, right? But the other one is the oversight of the portfolio itself, and one that we see missing a lot is OCM, right? The organizational change management as a real project. We call it the project, right? That's what it says up top, right? How do you transform an organization? And we get into this this vision step where if we go into a customer and they want to do training, they want to stand up a project management tool, they want to build a methodology. We step back and say, well, wait a minute, how do you harmonize the 4 gears? Any one of those gears move, the other ones have to move also, right? So our message is we don't have to do that, but somebody has to do it, right? So we can't just go out there and implement processes and training and tools and technology and a demand to change your culture or else. That doesn't work, right? So what we're really talking about is how do you put together this harmonized plan that takes a relatively long time to get to nirvana, right? So how do you chunk it out? The question is, how do you eat the cow? And the answer is one burger at a time, right? So there has to be some kind of an ongoing, supportable structure to really create a new infrastructure. So when we send those projects down the highway, that there's not a rough ride, right? So we talk about current state analysis and roadmap, and the vision stage. Again, this is not we're saying something we have to do. Somebody's got to do it, right? Typically what we get into is what is the current state, what is the adoption, what is the rigor of the processes, what's working, what's not working, and come up with what we would say the evidence or the basis of control, right? Why would you do a current state? What are you doing now? We don't. When we get a call, it's because there's trouble, right? The projects are coming off the rails. There's overruns on the schedule. There's overruns on the cost. There's not a benefits realization capability. The business plans are weak. The stakeholders are not accountable. I mean, there's a lot of conversations that come out to this. What are we doing with our stakeholders, or what are we not doing with our stakeholders and our team members to create the accountability such that we actually can control a really well-spec'd scope for a project and run it through a standard such that the organization is harmonized across the portfolio. So the analysis is saying, hey, okay, well, there's a gap, right? There is a traditional gap between, and we'll show an example of what we mean by the basis of control. But at the end of the day, it's going to be 4 dimensions. We'll get to that in a minute. The roadmap, specifically transforming steps for the PM discipline. So what's the roadmap? It looks like a project plan, right? That's what we call it, the project, right? What is I call it a mini portfolio of initiatives that's going to transform the four gears, which are the processes, the tools, the skills, the people, and the governance, right? So that's really what is a roadmap is, and what typically what we get into. I use the words rigorous and adoption and complexity. We see a lot of, when we do preparation interviews and do some of the observation of the artifacts, we have seen, I would say, plus or minus 50%, an organization has a rigorous process with low adoption. And what we try to do is say, hey, let's go low rigor, high adoption, because that's how you start, right? You don't go to the hardest part of portfolio and project management. You go to the base root of what are the bases, what are the critical lowest denominator to keep project on track to have control, right? So the gears and the vectors of success is, if we're saying, why do you want to change? Nobody comes to us and says, we want to do methodology because we have a really great one, but we just want to document it. No, we want to have a better methodology, a higher level of rigor. They come to us and they want to stand up project management technology. They're not saying just take what we have and publish it. Take it off the desktop, take it off the back of the envelopes, take it off the spreadsheets, and slam it up there. There's an expectation that there's going to be a higher level of rigor, which, oh, by the way, creates more bandwidth for those 6 roles for the project manager, right? So what this is really about is focusing on how do you do the control of the scheduling, the cost and labor, the quality, the scope, the benefits, which is the business case, right? So, we see a lot of focus on time, on budget, on spec. We call that is really the scoping, but we see a lot of gaps where the business case that comes out with the charter has some objectives, has some goals, but doesn't have really well-defined, I would say, the evidence of the underpinnings of what are the measurable benefits. What is this investment going to do? We can't do benefits realization unless we define those benefits as a measurable impact to the business. And so, how many project managers have been asked to say, how are you monitoring the realization of the benefits, right? And at the end of the day, that's the one that really ever matters. Hey, what does project failure look like? Oh, it's over cost and over budget. Well, wait a minute. If I ran over 25%, even 50% over the schedule, 50% on the cost, but I made $1 million investment, I spent 1.5, everybody says that's a failure. Well, wait a minute. The benefit realization is an increase of $2 million for the next 5 years. It's going to produce $10 million. So we were supposed to spend $1 million. We spent $1.5 million. Does that mean it's a failure? The real failure is the failure to deliver to realize the benefits, right? So that's a pretty high level of rigor and oversight and governance to ensure that when the project is over, that we can go back to the beginning and find that point of accountability and take a measure on that at the end. And if we don't get the investment, the return on the investment, how do we handle that, right? That's what governance is. So I already talked about this a little bit, the domino effect, right? If you do a step up in rigor, and then I'm reading at the third bullet here, the necessity to step up in rigor for processes and project manager skills, right? We get a lot of leading changes with organizations where they're trying to put a tool in, right? So that's the red flag that says, well, let's make sure that the scope includes the step up in rigor for the processes, for the methodology, for the skills, and oh, by the way, the governance processes to support this, right? So again, back to the 6 unbundled roles, right? The leadership, the especially on solutions areas, scheduling, data analysis, coordination, administration, right? So the process we're talking about today is, what do we mean by a process? Well, what's the process to unbundle and redistribute the roles for a project manager, right? So we got, this is the example of baking a cake, right? You need some goals, you need some accountability, you need an infrastructure. Oh, by the way, you also need the inputs, the transforming steps, and the outputs, right? So the foundation of this is, how do you harmonize centers of excellence to say that we have a center of excellence for scheduling, and we're unburdening the leader, the SME, who's solving a real big problem, but not dragging them down around the scheduling and the coordination and administration and the data analysis, right? So in this case, we're talking about, a methodology that changes and redistributes responsibilities. Is the project manager still accountable? Yes. But what do we do with those responsibilities, and how can we put that together, right? So the tools, right? So what is known gets managed. What is communicated gets lost. What isn't communicated gets lost. So So what gets managed creates control, right? So that's so the tools are critical. The governance, we talked about this. This is a high-level version of our portfolio and program management methodology. This is just an example, right? But this micro center of excellence would put forth for a portfolio and a program methodology how these roles are optimized, efficient, and we're going to get to some numbers on this. Okay, so let's talk about an example. What's the current state? Well, it says you get a set of findings. Okay, so let's see where that goes. So our recommendation is an organization looks into what we are using to create control, to create benefits realization, to understand that we have a baseline on the cost and the labor and how we can manage that, right? So that's looking into what is where do we stand today, what has to be fixed, right? So one of the things we're getting into is what is mature, what are the control models, what's out there, and what's being used, and I'll show the example in a minute. Oh, there's the minute. A second, I should have said. So this is a summary of a set of programs and projects and how many, I would say a red, yellow, green, not so much of how the project is performing in terms of on budget, on time. We're looking at the basis of control. So let's go in a little deeper. This is a real dashboard built that has active projects, and you see colors on that with yellow, green, and red. And this is a simple, very simple example of artifacts of a charter, requirements, project plan, change control, and cadence. Right. So we look for evidence of that, and if we don't see it, or if we do see it but it's weak, we come up with some scores. Right. So that's a big deal. So that says, well, here's what you have now. What do we want to turn to green? These are critical initiatives. How can we turn the corner? How do we change the organization such that we have the basis of control and we have it as a standard across the entire portfolio with all the project managers? Okay, so a summary of current state analysis findings. I'm not going to read this, but you can see that there's a lot of processes, artifacts missing, incomplete, the dashboards, and other concerns about the methodology, about the capabilities, about the roles, about what's being used. Okay, so the future state and the visioning is okay. So there's a lot of gaps. How do you start building these gaps? And typically, we're talking about a capability where we are building the foundations of control in I would say, we call it foundational because it's not at the highest level of rigor, but what we're looking for is high adoption and I would say meaningful rigor, something that's going to be a standard. Okay. So there's just showing this, some of the tasks that would be scheduled out over 2 and 3 weeks to put this roadmap together to get ready for a pilot. We can't do all these things. An integrated project plan has all these things with cadence and communications and resource versus capacity and the charters and the scope management plans, the risks, the issues, blockers, the technical requirements, the business plan itself. You can't do them all overnight, right? So what it gets down to is, what are the requirements for the roadmap? Where do we start? And this is an example, right? Here's an example where we have communications, we have a project charter. I'm reading the high ones, the project schedules, and the rest are mediums. And if it's low, it's not even on the chart. Okay. We have this terminology internally at Project Assistance. You know, a lot of methodologies have about 5 phases, and you know, to get started and you know, get a schedule going out there, we see a lot of dashboards that are like one-liners for a project, or maybe 5 phases or 5 milestones. And, you know, executives don't understand oftentimes that there's not a lot of meaningful approaches, critical paths, enough detail to know where the resources are. And so our definition of a 25er is 5 phases with 5 tasks. What does that mean? To get a portfolio going, if we could have at least 5 phases and 5 milestones and 5 tasks around those phases and milestones, it's a starting point, right? Is that the end point? No. But could you put together in a quarter or maybe in 8 weeks every project out there in some kind of a meaningful standard, so we can see what's going on and then start blowing the detail into it? So this $15 million program that we put together, the whole program was 75 tasks when we had something that looked like control. We were plus or minus 30% confidence of the schedule, and then we reassigned the details for the work streams or the projects that were the underpinnings of the program. We ended up with 1,500 tasks. But we started with 75 for a $15 million program, and it was pretty good looking, right? It gave us the boundaries of what we have to do. We had some colors around it. You know, we had amber, means that we put 5 tasks here, but we don't have confidence in it, and we're not going to give you plus or minus 30% until we get a little more methodology around this. One example, not a formal QA process, right? So that was you know, just sticking out. Therefore, so we had 5 tasks in there, and that thing didn't get resolved until like 3 months, right? But at least we had a placeholder out there, and QA was suffering, as often it does. But we were at least nailing down the requirements, getting designs out there, and getting some work done while we were putting the framing of the rest of the project. That's what I mean by a 25. To start somewhere, right? So here's some examples of executive dashboards. And again, you know, the question is, you know, could we show, like on the right side, bar graph that shows the capacity of the organization and where we're missing or going over, and therefore not making our commitments. You know, you can do this as 25ers. You shouldn't do it forever, but certainly it's a starting point. So more sophisticated, you know, this is an example showing BI access to project online. This works, and you know, you can get this for Clarity, Plan View, Primavera. You know, the basis of this is these sophisticated, rigorous tools that can really run serious programs. So I'm not going to get into the architecture. But you'll get those slides if you want them. Applying a managed service model to PMOs. So the inefficiency in the legacy model, we talked about that, right? How do we take some of the responsibilities of the project and redistribute it, right? So avenues of improvement. You know, we're going to talk a little bit about our fixed price model, you know, for project managers, but DIY is the first fork in the road. Do it yourself, right? I mean, we're a consulting firm, we can help you, but our job today is to put forth an idea, whether you hire us or not. Consider looking at it through a different lens, why we can be rigorous and we can be efficient, and we have these micro center of excellence, and make our project managers to be the great leaders and the great SMEs that they are, and not burden them on this other stuff, right? So this is a different version of uncoupling or unbundling or deconstructing a lot of the responsibilities of a project manager, right? So we talk about portfolio governance as a running a service level agreement. You know, that we promise a project manager will be on your project for X number of hours, and all those other hours that added up to 40 hours. You know, one of the things of the disruptive model is when you put a project manager on, especially if it's a staffing like our hourly project managers we put out there, they all bill 40 hours a week, right? It doesn't have to be that. I know we'll talk about Parkinson's law, where the work expands for the time allowed for the task. That's inefficient, right? So QA is important, right? To make sure that we're having the best practices, having a center of excellence, and making sure that the pieces are fitting together. This is an example of levels. We put projects into levels 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the other one is Uber or custom, right? And not everything fits into 4 levels. You're going to change like this $15 million program, digital transformation. That's once in a lifetime kind of project, so it doesn't fit into this model as a standard expectation, right? So this is what's a project manager going to do, right? Scope development, weekly cadence, and making sure that you're putting some time every day with the leadership capabilities. We talked about methodology, right? So how do we focus on getting the processes down, the artifacts down, and put them into a standard methodology? Again, simple, a standard that is reasonable, that is adoptable, that is not high rigor until the organization is ready to go to that level. Tools, we talked about quite a bit, right? You might have gathered that we do a lot with Project and Sherwell on the ITSM side, the support desk. And so that's one example, but doesn't mean it has to be Project. I'm picking on PlanView Clarity Project Primavera because there's other tools out there. Jira's good. Smart Sheets is out there, but they have deficiencies that don't really give you a really professional view of how the critical path works and how you see integrated cross dependencies across a program, things like that, right? I'm not saying it can't be done, but I'm just giving you a perspective based on our expertise and experience. The project managers, we talked a lot about that, about unbundling, right? We'll get into that a little bit more here in a minute with this example, right? So the 40-hour week is not efficient, right? There's pros and cons. The upside is a dedicated project manager availability. The downside, we talked about the inefficiency of the high cost, especially the high cost of administration with a high cost resource. Parkinson's law, it's been proven. Work will expand to the time allotted to it. So if we made a more efficient model, we don't get that leakage. If you look on some of the graphs out there on the internet about Parkinson's law, most of the productivity happens, in the first 20 to 40% of the effort. So the lone wolf staffing by hour is ubiquitous. It works well sometimes, and sometimes it doesn't, right? So to look at across the whole portfolio, we're showing some examples here. The hours of the level of complexity of a project and how much a project manager, leadership / SME would spend into a project. Oh boy, let me see. This is a spreadsheet showing the 4 levels. 4 is the highest, so we start there. Monthly hours assigned to a full-time project leader. We're showing staffing costs. You would cut this in half, probably internally, or maybe 2/3 of that, 100 an hour. You pay somebody 200,000 maybe, or all in with benefits and everything, PTO. But anyway, we're looking here, if we unbundle this and we start looking at some of the savings, we can save $72,000 there. Level 3 is 61,000. These are just examples: a 60,000, a 58,000. And what we're doing is we're creating two things: a lower cost and a higher level of capability. Not every great project leader can run the sophisticated scheduling, so therefore we push them down to the experts that can do that: master schedulers, coordinators, administrators. We beat this to death, so I think you have the point there. Something else I wanted to cover, I don't know what it was. Let's see the next one. The pricing model. This is an example pricing model we use for our customers that want to have fixed price project managers. We have an algorithm you can see the level assessment guidelines, cost range definitions, geographic spread, complexity of scope, resources assigned, and risk. Right. So we have a bunch of tools, and we can, put these stratify the levels of the projects and understand what the staffing model looks like and what the cost is for that. Okay. So that is the first 53 minutes of our hour. So I hope you got something out of that. What I'd like to do is to open the tour. I think is it ready to open the floor? Yeah. So we have case studies out there. This is one we did for Microsoft. We've been on the Inc. 500 fastest companies. We have a lot of evidence of our thought leadership online, on our white papers, our videos, our webinars like this. We did write the books. My most recent one is the Project Manager's Guide for Microsoft 2019, and that's with the App Press, which is a technical book publisher under Spring Nature, right? So a big publisher, and if you like Microsoft Project, you might want to do that. So thanks for your time today, and Dan, I'll turn it over to you, Dan Chikala, to close this out.
Thanks so much. And there is a questions portion of the console. You can see where the little caret there that says questions. You can click down and send any in if you have any at this time. Otherwise, I'll open the floor to Dan Banas if you had anything to add throughout the presentation to get your thoughts if you have any.
Yeah, Danny, there's limited time, so I don't want to take up too much, but I guess I'm going to reinforce with Gus that the basis of control is absolutely critical. Every client I go to, it looks as if, in many cases, there are templates, there are SharePoint sites, there are documents, there are processes to do charters, to do business cases before that, to do requirements definition, and then you go out and start taking a look at them, and they're not completed or very briefly completed. So I think one of the things I hope you get out of this is the criticality of that basis of control. That's really all I'll say right now.
Okay, thanks, Dan. And I saw one on the console. Will this slide deck be shared later with attendees? And the answer is yes. And Danny, I think you can describe how that works, that process.
Yes, you'll get a follow-up email in 24 hours that will include a recording of the webinar. Actually, it'll be an on-demand version of this webinar, and you will also be receiving a copy of the slide deck. So other than that, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Thank you so much, Gus and Dan, for providing all your expertise. I think this was a really great deck and presentation to work on.